So I want to talk for a sec about a very important topic called variables. And I want to acknowledge the fact that all of you have taken math courses and you've learned about variables in mathematics. And I want you to put that off to the side a little bit. I need to show you a couple things. So the first thing I'm going to say is, how do you declare a variable? And you simply just pick a name for it. So I have three variables here, x, y, and z. So a couple comments about declaring a variable. So first of all, there's specific rules that you have to follow. Like, there are certain words that are reserved for the programming language itself. You cannot use those as a variable name. There's also restrictions on different characters that you can have in a variable name. Your textbook has more discussion about that. The next thing I'll say is the variables I chose here, I did this on purpose. They're not good variable names at all. So x, y, and z, we know that x is 10, y is 12.6, and z is this is awesome, but we don't really understand like what does x represent. So we want to stay away from naming variables like that. So what if we said that this was gold medals 1? All of a sudden you're like, oh wow, okay, now I understand what that variable is without having to ask someone or read some documentation or something like that. And for y, let's say I call it miles per gallon. And you're like, oh, okay, now I understand what that variable represents. I would also point out, you see how the first letter is lowercase and then I have multiple words here? And you see with the second word starts, I made it a capital letter, and then the third word where it starts, I made it a capital letter. That's called camel case. It's a real common practice. So in your descriptive words, you can use camel case so that people can read your variable names a little bit easier. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, let's pick a different name for this too. Let's call this this is a phrase. Okay. Now the next thing I'm going to say is this. I would like to point out that most programming languages, when you declare a variable, you have to declare what type of variable it is. In other words, what kind of data does it store? All right. So in this case, Python has a data type called an int. And that's what this one is right here. Int is short for integer, and so basically think of whole numbers, right? A different kind of data type is called a float, which is short for floating point number. You could think of those as decimals, right? And so any number with decimals, that is what we call a float, right? So Python is smart enough to look at your data and figure out on its own what type this variable is going to be. Almost all other programming languages, you have to define what data type it is. So you have to explicitly say that, but not in Python. Python just says, I'll figure it out on my own, okay? And then lastly, this right here, this variable at the bottom right here, this is a string. It's holding a string. That's what kind of data type that is. All right, and then we can go ahead and, we can use these. Let's see here, gold medals 1. Okay, I'm going to print that out, and it should print 10 to the screen. Let's try it, see what happens. Yep, sure enough, it printed out 10 to the screen. Okay. I showed you a trick in the last video where you can separate strings, or you can separate items to print using a comma. So let's try that right now. Look at that, there's 10 and there's 12.6. It's great. And can I do a third one? And sure enough, there they all three are right there, 10, 12.6, and this is awesome. We're all there. All right. All right, so that was a quick rundown on variables and data types. We're going to talk more in the future about what happens when we combine them and what happens when we start doing math with these variables.